So I'm a part of the Heated Rivalry Psychosis, and I tried recording this video before, and then everything kind of changed really quickly in the fandom. So here's a quick, here's a quick reworking of the original idea. So my original idea was just to talk about the fandom and then like explore how the fandom is organized and how people are interacting with the content. But then like the last couple of days, it seems like things have kind of fallen apart in the Heated Rivalry fandom. And I mean, like, who hasn't seen this happen in a fandom before? Like, I was a Tumblr girly, so I've seen this happen. Like, it seems like Heated Rivalry is really speedrunning the rise and fall of fandoms at like an astonishing speed. So if you're like me, you probably at first were a little taken back by all that's going on, because I mean, I felt like we were having a great time, and then I blinked and we were not having a good time. So the purpose of this video is to kind of look at why the fandom is doing what it's doing and what really is happening here. So I got into the show in December, and it really helped me cope with some things. And then, you know, as a fangirl, I got on Tumblr and for some reason the threads, and really started reading more fan fiction. And it was fun. It was great. And, you know, we got fun edits of the show, and we got some hot pictures of the boys, and it was great. And I was having fun at a distance. But the TLDR of this whole thing is that some people essentially just got really excited about the show. And, you know, while some people have just been, you know, creating edits and sharing things about the actors and just like being fans, other people have taken their fandoms to another level. And this happens to like every fandom out there. But Heated Rivalry has just done it really fast, where these fans have just gone a little too far. And I've outlined here some of the problems that I found with the fandom, and we're just gonna go through them. And you know what? I'm sure that by the time I'm able to like film and edit this, that things will have changed and maybe we'll have some new issues. But you know what? Paciencia. So I think it's important to start with this issue that I saw some people talking about, which is like straight women in the fandom. And I was going to talk about this in the original version of this video, where a lot of people are criticizing, or at least speculating about, straight women being into Heated Rivalry. And a lot of it is based on like, oh, straight women are fetishizing gay men or queer men, and specifically these actors, and like they're just watching this show because it's essentially soft porn. And you know what? Like, my original take on this is that, you know, we don't know these people's sexuality, these seemingly straight women. And I will say some of them will just say like, oh, as a straight woman, I love this show. And that's great. But I think initially I was like, no, like, why are we judging these people? And like, yeah, this show like arguably sets it up to be like, come for the sex, stay for the yearning. And that's okay. Like, that's why a lot of us have gotten into the show, why we like it. And, you know, in this like puritanistic wave that we're writing, it's new, it's fun, it's intriguing to have a show that actually shows queer sexual relationships. And, you know, initially I was just like, it's fine, you know, straight women being into this. And, you know, I read some stuff that was essentially like, well, this creates a space for straight women to not feel threatened. And, you know, and this might reflect a lot on just the spaces that I'm in. But I read some research that was essentially like, oh, you know, men with men relationships sometimes is attractive to straight women because it removes danger from the equation. So where like women may often, you know, face harassment or assault in relationships, not necessarily just like like boyfriend and girlfriend kind of situation, but like in everyday life. And when you have these men-centered stories, then you remove that aspect, that potential of harming women from the equation. It just doesn't happen because women aren't in the story. And so like that's what I was banking on. I was like, well, people are just relying on this show so that they can understand sexuality and not feel it in danger. But then the weeks passed, but essentially I see it now. Basically, I've seen a lot of weirdness coming out of it, and I can't say that it's straight women, queer women, not women, but like I've seen a lot of issues, and I understand why some of it has been pointed towards straight women, and it has a lot to do with like hypersexualizing the characters, the actors, queer people in general, and this is important that I like emphasize that there's a lot of potentially hypersexualizing things that are safe, that it's fine. Like I've seen a lot of edits or like the edit big old freak that it's hypersexualizing, but it's essentially safe because we're talking about the characters. We are playing with what we were given, and we are playing with what we were given, which is the show, the characters, the scenes, whatever, and then just adding some music to it and some text. And like I think that that's good and that's safe. But it's when we go beyond that, and I think especially when it breaches into real life, and that's where we're having problems. By the way, once in a while, if you see this little pile of fur moving, it's the little puppy girl. Puppy girl. Aww. She's sleepy. My goodness, it's so sticker. So to get back on track, I think the most important thing is where it has disrespected real people. So I have a problem with RPF, which is real person fiction, because of the real person aspect of it. And the way that fans have treated some of the actors. And so that's where we're just going to jump right in to try to keep this video short. So one of the first things that I saw was basically criticisms on how some fans are treating the actors. So I think it started out with, a lot of interviewers asking the same questions, and it was a lot of like sexual questions, and like I get it. The show is what it is. And a lot of them would start with like, haha, you're in the show where we've seen a lot of you. And then like, oh, what's your butt like? What's your butt routine like? And, how did it feel to be in those intense scenes? And, great. Of course, the boys are going to talk about that, and it's part of the show, and awesome. And, shout out to all of the intimacy coordinators. But then I think it started, like it kept going. And I think one of the videos that I saw was where Connor presented at the SAG-AFTRA Awards, which now has a new name, and I'm not bothering to look it up. I'm just gonna find the video really quickly. I don't remember her name. Bro, get a grip. What's it called? So essentially, it happened that Janelle James from Abbott Elementary and Connor Story, who plays Ilya, they presented an award, an actor's award. I think it was SAG-AFTRA. Essentially, after they presented the award, they were being interviewed, and Variety asked Janelle a question, essentially about Connor, and her response was just,
So when you look at Connor now, and you think about those scenes in Heated Rivalry, what goes through your mind?
I'm thinking about his excellent Russian accent that he does. I'm thinking about his characterization. I'm thinking that he is adorable and he looks like a leading man, and I'm excited to see where he goes next.
So the interviewer asks Janelle what she thinks of some of the scenes in Heated Rivalry, and it's very much implied that it's just like, oh, what do you think about the sexy scenes? And she is so beautiful in the way she just moves away from it and says, I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about his accent and his skill and the wonderful performance that these young people are putting on. And that's so nice, but I think like that's the appropriate response. And I think that that's what a lot of fans that are highlighting is that like these interviewers kept asking these questions that were asking other people to hypersexualize them. The interviewers were hypersexualizing them, and like, you know, anyone would get tired of that. But it also just seems like Connor specifically is not about that. He very much doesn't like that, whereas Hudson's a little bit more chill about it, but still like he has had his own good responses to when people kind of push him too far. So like that's where I think it started, where there was like a lot of harassment of the actors. So with the questions, and then, you know, fans start jumping to their defense, which is interesting because fans think that they're defending them, and then they might end up going too far. I've seen some posts where they're like babying them. They're just like, oh, you don't know what's good for him. This was when Connor signed with CAA. And I saw some people saying like, oh, you have to trust him and he knows what's best for his career. And people are like, no, he doesn't. Like, that's why you hire an agent, so that they can help you with your career and help guide you. And like, of course, they need to listen to him. But like, what? Anyway, so the next step of this is where fans are sexualizing them, right? And then, look, I was at one point an RPF girly. You know, that was back when like Justin Bieber, One Direction, and all those big pop idols were, you know, like 16 or, you know, young Wendy. And, you know, got kidnapped by One Direction. Those kinds of fan fictions, those were my jam back when I was a young person. Nowadays, I can't handle them. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that people haven't really moved on from those things. And like, they still place themselves in these like fictional relationships. And I want to have a disclaimer here that people who are young, like I was, like, you know, like 13, 14, honestly, I'll give you up until you're like 18. To like, you're not mature enough, and it's cool, you want to fantasize, and that's cute, that's cool, whatever. Fantasize, write your silly little fan fictions, but like, don't let it breach into real life. Like, get to the real person. And this is what happens essentially, is that fans have started digging, and they found an alleged girlfriend of Hudson's. And like, I'm not going to share anything because I don't know if they're dating. And honestly, she deserves privacy because she didn't sign up for this. And he doesn't even follow her on Instagram. And people are like, oh, that's why we know that he's like trying to hide her. Whatever. Like, whatever. Leave them alone, maybe. If it is who they think it is. She's a tattoo artist and her work is beautiful. And honestly, I'd get tattooed by her. And then the next step of that is that essentially he's been doing a lot of press, and he's, you know, done the D-Squared fashion show where he opened for them. And then I guess there was an after party, and we see videos of him like dancing with models, and like he's clearly a very touchy, affectionate person, and that's cool. And then fans are getting in there being like, oh, I'm praying for his girlfriend, and like, oh, I wouldn't be able to handle it if I was his girlfriend, and like all this stuff. And I'm just like, y'all need to chill out. This is not your relationship, and it literally doesn't matter. You literally does not matter to you. So then the problem was that a lot of people were disappointed that he had this girlfriend, and I guess then came the assumption that it's like, if he has a girlfriend, then he must be straight, and therefore like ruined my fantasy. Then the fantasy being of him and Connor being together, which is like, this isn't Twilight era. We have intimacy coordinators so that people don't develop strange relationships because of on-set requirements. I just need people to let go of this idea that like co-stars are going to date. It is so 2010s, and like, we loved it when we were in it, but then like we saw a lot of fallout from all that. And so we can move on. We can let people be friends. Jesus. And then there's just the fact that, like, oh, he has a girlfriend, so he must be straight. And I just want to say bisexuality exists. There's more than just gay and straight. So then, again, this theory that, oh, he must be straight. I saw this one post on Threads that kind of pissed me off. So I'm just going to share it with y'all. So also Perp said, I keep seeing folks wheel out the Kit Connor quote when talking about Hudson Williams and Heated Rivalry. And if you don't know, Kit Connor, he was in Heartstopper, a Netflix show in which he played a bi character. And essentially what happened is that fandom, the Heartstopper fandom, kind of said that he was queer baiting for, not stating his sexuality, and he eventually did come out as bi with this tweet, and then he fell off of social media, and he's been out of social media essentially, other than professional things since. And that sucks. So I'm going to continue. Possible hot take, but I don't think we should conflate someone barely of age being pressured to figure out and declare his sexuality with an adult actor not wanting to come out in 2026 because of career opportunities and fandom viability. So essentially, they're saying oh, well, Kit Connor was a minor, which he was, and we shouldn't compare us trying to force him out of the closet to this grown, again, I think Hudson's 25, so comparing to 25-year-old Hudson. And oh, we're forcing him. Well, he's 25 and he owes us his sexuality because otherwise what? Otherwise he's queer baiting? I feel and it's the specific phrasing, because of career opportunities and fandom viability. And I understand what they're trying to say. They are literally saying queer baiting, because saying oh, well, the fandom loves it when, the actors play into it and when they're potentially queer and when there's a potentiality that they'll date and that he's playing that up. But I'm just babes, that's normal. First of all, they are close friends. They were very intimate with one another in the show, so it's kind of impossible that you don't form some kind of bond with the person. But at the end of the day, he doesn't owe us anything at all. And it's just crazy that in big old 2026 we're still acting like actors or literally anybody owes us their sexuality. And if he is dating a woman, that doesn't mean he's straight. That doesn't. Time to move on, y'all. I don't care. It doesn't matter. When he decides, when and if he decides to ever come out, that's great. That's great. That's all I have to say on that. And since I was talking about Hudson and his alleged girlfriend, I should probably talk about Connor. And I think people have done Connor dirty in a lot more ways, because he keeps himself, I think, a lot more, not hidden. What's the word here? He's more private, and that's cool. But essentially, I found this out recently, that there's a rumor that Connor and François Arnault, who plays Scott in Heated Rivalry, that they're dating. I found that rumor, and then I was well, what? Turns out it's based off a picture, a photo booth picture that they took, and I guess they didn't share, but it got shared somehow. And it's them longingly looking into each other's eyes. And so that was, a hard launch.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no.
I just, first of all, first of fucking all, it's a picture taken by two actors who you just watch 6 episodes of them showing how capable they are of looking into someone's eyes and acting like they're absolutely enamored. And honestly, great job. If they are in a relationship, awesome. If not, that's cool too. we don't know and we don't get to know unless they tell us. And that's it. But the problem here hasn't been, oh, they're probably dating or they are dating, whatever. The problem has been people are acting like Francois is like taking advantage of Connor in some way. I've seen people say like, oh, he's taking advantage of Connor's fame. Sorry to break it to you. Francois was in the scene, in the filming scene before Heated Rivalry, and he's also in Heated Rivalry. He's like a main character in the series, in book series, in the show, and it's... But then the next point is like, he's way older. I think Francois is like 40-something. Oh my god, he's taking advantage of Connor. Babe, what? Sorry. 2 consenting adults? What? Anyway. And then, like, there's the fact that Francois is the only out bi man in the show that I know of. So it's just like, okay, so y'all want queer representation. You want these actors to come out as something. And then the one actor you have that is out, you ostracize him? And, like, Francois has essentially, like, abandoned social media in a way. Like, he's unfollowed a bunch of people, and he has made statements saying, like, I'm done with this. Because people have been so shitty. And I just want to know, like, what's going on? Why? Didn't y'all want a queer man? Didn't y'all want a queer man? Whatever. And, like, not to mention the fact that Francois is the one who ardently, often, like, all the time is talking about how the real NHL is not queer inclusive.
I just hope that it brings on like actual change in the league, and that like it has a real influence on how they treat their own players and the possibility of that, because it's not historically the most open association.
Arguably, they're just as bad as the books make him out to be. And, like, if you haven't read the books, and honestly, I've only read Heated Rivalry in the long game, but, like, the next season, the big villain, and in this season too, but the big villain is the league and the culture. So, like, it's important that he's pointing these things out, and the fact that the NHL is profiting off of the popularity of Heated Rivalry, and nobody's asking them to do better. But Francois is the bi representation you want, and he is standing up for queer people in sports. So, like, maybe let's not ostracize him. And then the last point is that I've seen things about how queer people have been left out of the fandom somehow, like being excluded from the fandom. And so I guess this goes back to my, like, straight women are the problem in the fandom. And, like, straight women aren't the problem, but excluding gay and lesbian people, and then trans folks being outright, like, I want to say excluded again, but I want to put more emphasis on it, and how, like, some people have outright just said, like, no, this isn't for you. This isn't about you. And that's, y'all, stop. And essentially, I just saw, like, on Reddit, posts about how, like, a trans person felt that they really related to the 3rd episode, which is about Skip. It basically, some women started saying that they felt uncomfortable by the post, and that, like, it's not for the trans person. And first of all, we don't get to decide what's for someone, what's not. We don't get to decide what someone relates to or not. And queer stories are relatively new, especially ones that aren't about suffering. And regardless, like, we've always read queer subtext. Like, queer people have always been creating things, and queer people have always been consuming things. And we've always taken whatever message we want out of story, or whatever message it is, you know, we will apply it to ourselves. And so, like, that doesn't mean a queer person can't watch Love Actually and feel like it's for them. Love Actually is a bad example. Like, we can't watch Dear John, that's a song. Can I name one romance? P.S. I Love You. That doesn't mean that queer people can't watch something like P.S. I Love You and read their own queer subtext into it. Or, horror genre is like known for having a lot of queer subtext because of homophobia, but then also because like queer people often see themselves as ostracized, and I'm not going to get into that. Essentially, like, the stories will always be there, and it doesn't matter whether it's text or subtext. People will interpret stories in the way that feels the most relatable to them. And so it feels really, really rude to just tell someone, like, not only is what you said wrong, how you relate to the story, but also it makes me uncomfortable. Like, shut up. Just shut up. Don't watch it. Don't read this post. Don't watch this video. Just don't know that, like, the internet is optional. That, like, almost everything on there is optional, and that you can choose to just not engage. Yeah. And sometimes I think that about myself, like me engaging with this whole thing, but like I want to. So I guess to try to wrap this up in a cute little bow, I think it's crazy that we keep asking people to come out. First of all, nobody owes us anything. But then I've seen, a lot of people rightfully saying, I hope sports people, athletes see this show and feel comfortable enough to come out. And I think in a way, these kinds of occurrences are proving to them that it's not safe to come out, that people will judge them, that people might treat them poorly because of their sexuality or because of who they choose to date, and yada, yada, yada. And then there's the fact that, like, bisexuals are going to be questioned and, told that they're indecisive, or that non-binary people and trans people are just outright going to be excluded, as they have often been. And I think, like, we're not making a good argument for people to feel comfortable in coming out. And if we really do want people to feel comfortable in their sexuality, in coming out, in whatever degree that is, they don't need to be public about it, but just to feel more comfortable in themselves, we need to create that environment. We need to create that environment, not just, physically in our physical space, but also online and, in all these other places that information gets dissipated, that communities are formed. We need to make safe communities. And I think right now is a really bad time to be a bad ally. Queer people are quickly losing the little footing that they had legally, that we acquired over the last few decades. And, if you claim to be an ally, then you really got to ride for all of us. I personally don't think there's such thing as a TERF because, a trans exclusive radical feminist. There's no such thing as a radical feminist who is exclusive of any communities. Because if your feminism isn't inclusive, it isn't feminism. And I'll stand on that 10 toes down. And when I say inclusive, I do mean inclusive of trans people, of non-binary people, of all sexualities, as well as of Black and brown people, Indigenous people, immigrants, and all of those marginalized communities. It is inclusive in every way that it needs to be. And you know what? I think that's a good place to end the video. I think y'all should read some of these fun little books. If you want more information on inclusive feminism, some highlights here are Audre Lorde, Gloria Anzaldúa, Judith Butler, always a slay, Jasbir Puar. I'm a big fan of terrorist assemblages. I base a lot of my critical thinking off of that. And if you have any other reading recommendations, I encourage you to, link them down below. And, we get educated together. And you know what? And we support queer communities. Hell yeah. Bye!